Caleb's heart was a locked room, and he'd swallowed the key years ago. The ranch was his fortress of solitude, built on a foundation of grief. Out on the prairie, the wind was his only neighbor, and the horizon was the only thing that never left. Then one night they appeared, 5 figures dark against a blizzard that was screaming down from the mountains. They weren't ghosts, but they might as well have been. Apache women pushed from their land, their faces like old maps telling stories of hardship. The eldest spoke, her voice like stones grinding together. She wasn't begging, she was offering a deal, their hands for his roof, their skills for his food. Caleb looked them over, his eyes cold and calculating. He didn't see people, he saw a solution. 5 sets of hands to push back the dust and the decay that had been creeping in since his wife Mary died. He didn't really see the one named Anna. Not then. She was just a piece of the bargain. He gave one sharp nod. The deal was struck. The storm raged, but inside Caleb's fortress, something far more dangerous had just been allowed inside. He had no way of knowing he'd just invited a thaw into his endless winter. A thaw that would shatter everything he thought he knew. He led them to the bunkhouse, a cold, empty box that mirrored his own soul. He shut the door on them and walked back to his silent house, back to the familiar comfort of his pain. But the house refused to stay silent. Slowly, almost sneakily, things began to change. First, the smells. The dead air of memory and dust was replaced by the scent of baking bread, of stew simmering with wild herbs he never knew grew on his own land. The silence he had cultivated for years was broken, not by loud noises, but by the soft sweep of a broom, the gentle thud of hands kneading dough. He would hear them murmuring in their own language, a sound that should have felt like an invasion. But instead it felt like a low, steady hum, the sound of a heart starting to beat again. He'd watch them from the darkness of his study. They moved with a quiet purpose, a team that didn't need words. They mended the curtains his wife had made, their stitches so small and perfect it was like they were healing the fabric itself. They polished her silver candlesticks until they threw light into corners that hadn't seen it in years. Caleb felt like a ghost in his own home, a home that was starting to feel less like a tomb and more like a house. He found his eyes drawn to Anna more than the others. She was the quietest one, a pool of perfect stillness. One afternoon, he saw her sitting in a sliver of sunlight, working on something. It was a corn husk doll, his daughter Lily's doll, an old, forgotten thing from a happier time. Lily hadn't touched it in years. Anna's fingers moved with a strange grace, her needle rising and falling, a tiny, determined act of repair. It was just a doll, nothing more. But as Caleb watched her, he felt a sharp, unfamiliar pain in his chest. It felt as if her needle wasn't just fixing the doll, but was sewing a single, perfect stitch into the ragged hole in his own heart. He didn't like it, not one bit, because healing was a language he'd long forgotten how to speak. Lily was a child made of silence. At 6 years old, she was a small, pale reflection of her father's grief. She moved through the house like smoke, never making a sound. The world to her was a place defined by what was missing. But the arrival of the women changed the currents in the quiet air. Lily would watch them from behind doorways, her big, serious eyes soaking in every detail. She wasn't scared of them. She was drawn to them, to their gentle movements, to the song of their strange words. One morning the silence broke. Lily walked right up to Anna, who was grinding corn by the hearth, her hands covered in white flour. She held out the corn husk doll, the doll with the perfectly mended arm. Anna stopped working. She looked from the doll to the child, and then a smile spread across her face. Not a polite smile, but a real one, a smile that lit up her eyes like a sunrise. It was a light so rare in that house it felt like a miracle. She took the doll, nodded softly, and from that moment on, the little girl was her shadow, a tiny ghost haunting a quiet sunbeam. But Lily wasn't just watching, she was learning. One evening, Caleb was cleaning his rifle, lost in the ritual, when he felt a small hand on his knee. It was Lily. She looked up at him, her gaze so clear it was unnerving. "Papa," she said, her voice small but sharp enough to cut through the heavy air. "Does Anna's heart hurt like yours?" The question hit him like a physical blow. A stone dropped into a deep, dark well. He had built his walls so high, so thick, he thought no one could ever see inside. He never imagined a 6-year-old girl could walk right through them like they were morning mist. He had no answer for her, because for the first time in years, he was forced to wonder. What if his wasn't the only broken heart in this house? The sky turned the color of a fresh bruise. The wind started to scream, circling the ranch like a hungry wolf. A blizzard fell out of the sky, a sudden, violent wall of white, cutting them off from the world. No town, no doctor, no hope of help. And that's when the fire started in Lily. A fever took her, fast and mean. One minute she was fine, the next she was limp and burning up, her breathing shallow and fast. For Caleb, it was history repeating itself. A nightmare he was forced to live all over again. He saw his wife, Mary, in Lily's glassy eyes. He felt the same choking helplessness that had destroyed him once before. He was a man of action, a man who could fix anything with his hands. But he couldn't fix this. He was frozen, trapped by the ghosts of his own failure. The world got very small. It was just this room, the howling wind, and the terrifying sound of his daughter fighting for every breath. His hope was starting to crack. And then Anna stepped forward. She wasn't just the quiet woman who mended dolls anymore. She was a general taking command of a battlefield. She touched Lily's forehead, her hand cool and steady. She spoke in her language, and the other women moved. They brought in snow to pack in cloths. They brought out dried roots and herbs Caleb had never seen before. She brewed a dark, steaming tea that filled the room with the smell of the deep earth. While Caleb paced like a caged animal, the 5 women formed a circle of healing around his daughter. They worked without stopping, their movements practiced and sure. They began a low rhythmic chant, a constant hum of power against the storm's rage. Caleb was forced to the side, forced to give up control. He had to put the life of his only child, the last piece of his heart, into the hands of a stranger. A woman whose ways he didn't understand. A woman who might be saving his daughter, or might be doing something else entirely. In the heart of the storm, as his daughter burned, Caleb was stripped bare. All he had left was his fear, and a terrifying, unwanted seed of trust. The nights and days blurred into one long gray twilight. The only clock was the lantern by Lily's bed, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The blizzard howled outside, a perfect match for the storm inside Caleb's heart. He sat in a chair in the corner, a useless guard watching a war he didn't know how to fight. He couldn't take his eyes off Anna. He saw the exhaustion carving new lines around her eyes, but underneath it, he saw fire. A fierce, stubborn resolve that seemed to push back the cold. In the terrible silence between Lily's ragged breaths, he heard a voice, and he realized it was his own. The words came out rusty and broken, pulled from a part of himself he kept locked and buried. He spoke of Mary, of her laughter, of the crushing silence she left behind. He spoke of his guilt, the stupid pride that made him think he could outrun grief. Anna listened. She just listened, her dark eyes never leaving his. She didn't offer fake comfort or easy words. When his confession finally ended, leaving him feeling hollowed out and raw, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, but her words were heavy with a sorrow he recognized. She told him about her village, about the blue-coated soldiers who came at dawn. She told him about a husband she loved, a child she lost, a people blown apart like ashes in the wind. They weren't speaking English or Apache anymore. They were speaking the universal language of loss. In that moment, he saw her, truly saw her for the first time. Not as a hired hand, but as another survivor. Later, as he finally fell into a restless sleep in his chair, she did something unexpected. She gently draped a thick wool blanket over his shoulders. The simple weight of it, the warmth, was more intimate than any touch. It was a gesture of pure, simple care that reached him in the deepest part of his loneliness. He had opened the door to 5 strangers. He was beginning to realize they knew the layout of his locked rooms better than he did. The third dawn broke with a strange, holy quiet. The wind was gone. The world outside was a perfect, silent sculpture of snow and light. Inside the house, an even bigger storm had passed. Lily's fever had broken. Her breathing was deep and even. Her skin was cool. Caleb touched her forehead, and the relief that hit him was so huge it was like being struck by lightning. A shudder ran through his entire body, leaving him weak and trembling. He looked at the women. They were exhausted, their faces pale in the morning light, but they were serene. They weren't just workers anymore. They were saviors. They had held the line when he had been ready to break. They had called his daughter back from the edge of a cliff he'd seen his wife fall from. Anna walked toward him, holding a steaming mug of coffee. As he reached for it, his rough, calloused fingers brushed against hers. It was an accident, but a jolt went through him, a spark of warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. It was the first time he had willingly touched someone since Mary. He held her gaze, and in her eyes he didn't see pity. He saw understanding, a shared strength. But then he saw something else flicker in their depths, something guarded, a secret. He looked around the room, the mended curtains, the clean floors, his sleeping child. This wasn't a tomb anymore. It was a shelter, a home. The bargain he had struck in the snow wasn't for their labor. He understood that now. It was for this, for the quiet, stubborn power of life that they had carried in with them, planting it right in the middle of his wasteland. He took a sip of the coffee. It was strong and bitter, and it tasted like a new beginning. But as he looked at Anna, a cold knot of suspicion tightened in his gut. Her remedies were too perfect, her timing too precise. It wasn't just knowledge she had, it was something more. He had to ask himself a terrible question. Did Lily get sick by chance? Or was the sickness a test, a demonstration of power? He had let these women into his home. He had no idea what they were really capable of. Weeks passed. The snow melted and the prairie began to breathe again. Caleb needed supplies, which meant a trip to the town of Redemption, a place he'd been avoiding. He rode down the main street and felt the eyes on him. Hard eyes. Suspicious eyes. Word travels fast in a small town, and the word was that Caleb, the broken widower, was keeping a group of Apache women at his ranch. As he tied up his horse, Marshal Thompson came toward him. The marshal was a man who wore his badge like a crown, and he had two other ranchers with him, their faces set like stone. "Caleb," the marshal said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "we hear you're harboring Indians up at your place." The word harboring made them sound like a disease. "It ain't right," one of the ranchers spat, tobacco juice hitting the dirt near Caleb's boot. "And it ain't safe. They belong at the fort with the rest of them." Their words were dripping with poison, the casual, everyday hatred of men who saw the world in black and white. They weren't talking about Anna, or the old woman, or any of them as people. They were talking about them like stray cattle, a problem to be managed. The whole town was watching, waiting. They knew him as the quiet man, the man who kept to himself, the man who broke. They expected him to bend, to give in, to throw the women out and go back to being the sad, silent man they were all comfortable with. But Caleb wasn't that man anymore. He stood there, the dust swirling around his boots, and he didn't see the marshal's smug face. He saw Anna's hands, steady and sure, brewing the tea that saved his daughter. He saw the old woman's patient fingers, teaching Lily how to weave. He heard Lily's laughter, a sound he thought he'd lost forever, now a part of his home. These women hadn't brought danger. They had brought life. They hadn't just healed his daughter, they had healed him. The ice that had encased his heart for years didn't just melt. It shattered. He stood up straight, his shoulders broad. He looked Marshal Thompson right in the eye. The silence stretched on, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was his silence, a weapon he had been sharpening his whole life. When he spoke, his voice was low, but it cut through the air like a razor. "They are not Indians," he said, each word a stone. "They are my family." The words hung in the air, a shocking, impossible declaration. He took a half step forward, his hand falling to rest naturally near the butt of his pistol. "They are under my protection," he continued, his gaze sweeping over the three men. "Anyone who rides out to my land to harm them," he let the threat hang in the air, "he will answer to me." He hadn't just defended them, he had claimed them. In the middle of a town called Redemption, the silent rancher had finally found his voice, and no one was more surprised to hear it than him. But as he stared down the marshal, he saw a flicker of something in the other man's eyes. Not just anger, recognition. The marshal wasn't just enforcing the law. This was personal. The ride back to the ranch felt different. The land wasn't empty anymore. It was his, to protect. He wasn't just a man riding to a house. He was a man riding home. As he came over the last hill, he saw them, all 5 of them, standing outside waiting. They had seen the riders from town approach his land, and then, after a long, tense pause, turned back. Anna stood a little in front of the others. He couldn't read her expression, but he could see the tension in the way she held her hands. He swung down from his horse, the saddle leather creaking in the still air. He walked toward her, his steps heavy and sure. He stopped right in front of her. The air between them was electric with everything they hadn't said. He reached into his coat. He pulled out the small, worn leather pouch she'd given him on that first night. The pouch with the smooth, polished stones. The payment. The symbol of their business arrangement. He took her hand. It felt small and cool in his. He unfolded her fingers and placed the pouch back into her palm. Then he did something else. He gently closed her fingers back over it, his big, rough hand covering hers for a moment. He looked her right in the eye. The deal was off. The debt was paid, but not in the way they had planned. This wasn't business anymore. But Anna didn't look relieved. She looked terrified. She clutched the pouch and her eyes darted toward the road leading to town, then back to him. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She finally found her voice, a shaky whisper. "He recognized me," she said. "Who?" Caleb asked, though he already knew. "The marshal," she said, her voice barely audible. "His name is Thompson, but I knew him by another name. He was the sergeant, the one who gave the order." The blood ran cold in Caleb's veins. This wasn't about prejudice. It was about a ghost from the past. "The order for what?" he asked. Anna looked at him, and now he could see the old, deep wound she carried, the wound that mirrored his own. "The order to burn our village," she said. "The order that killed my husband and my son." The pouch in her hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. It wasn't just a payment. It was a link to a past that was about to come roaring back to life. Whether they were ready for it or not, the quiet peace of the ranch was gone, replaced by a tense, waiting silence. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like approaching horses. That evening, Anna came to him as he sat on the porch, staring out into the darkness. She was holding the leather pouch. "This is not a payment," she said, her voice low and steady. "It was never a payment. It was a promise." She sat down, not close, but not far either. "My people, we did not live here. This was sacred ground, a place of healing. There is a spring, high in the hills behind this house. The water there, it holds memories." Caleb watched her, saying nothing. "Before the soldiers came," she continued, "my grandfather, the elder of our tribe, hid our sacred things. Story blankets, the ceremonial pipes, the carved stones that hold our history. He buried them near the spring, so the water would protect their spirit." She finally looked at him, her eyes pleading. "Thompson, the marshal, he was there. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a thief. He was looking for gold, but he found our history instead. He took what he could carry, but he couldn't find the main cache. He believes it is still here, on your land." Now it all made sense. The way the women moved, the way they seemed to know the land. They hadn't stumbled upon his ranch by accident. They had come here on a pilgrimage, a recovery mission, and Lily's sickness. "The tea you gave my daughter," Caleb said, his voice flat. "The roots. Where did they come from?" "From the spring," Anna said quietly. "It is a place of life. I knew it would heal her." She had used the sacred, hidden power of her people to save his child, and in doing so, she had revealed her location to the one man in the world she was hiding from. Thompson must have heard about the miraculous recovery, put 2 and 2 together, and realized who was living on Caleb's land. "He will come back," Caleb said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Anna said. "He will not risk letting anyone else find what he believes is a treasure. He will come to wipe the board clean, to finish what he started at my village." Caleb stood up and looked out at the vast, dark prairie. It wasn't just his land anymore. It was a battlefield. It was a sanctuary. It was the last stand for a people's memory. He turned back to her. Then we'll be ready for him. Anna opened the small leather pouch. She poured the contents into her hand. They weren't just polished stones. Each one was carved with a tiny, intricate symbol. These are not just stones, she said, her voice filled with a new strength. They are the keys. The days that followed were a blur of frantic preparation. Caleb was no longer just a rancher. He was a commander. The women were no longer just housekeepers. They were soldiers in a different kind of war. He taught them to load and fire a rifle. Their hands, once used to mending and weaving, now learning the cold, hard mechanics of death. They were quick learners, their movements precise and economical. They, in turn, showed him the land. Not the way he knew it, as acres to be worked, but as a living thing. They showed him ravines that could hide a man, rock formations that made perfect lookout points, game trails that could be used as escape routes. The eldest woman, her face a mask of determination, worked with herbs and powders, creating not remedies but traps. Poisons for the water barrels, powders that would burn the eyes, mixtures that would spook their horses. They were turning the ranch into a fortress, a death trap. Lily watched it all, her young face serious. She wasn't scared. She was a part of it. She would carry messages, keep watch from the window, her small frame filled with a purpose far beyond her years. In the evenings, a strange calm would settle over them. They would eat together, a small, determined army on the eve of battle. Caleb and Anna found themselves talking, not of the past, but of the future. A future that was a fragile, uncertain thing. One night she touched the scar above his eye, a faint white line from a long-ago fight. "Every scar is a story," she said softly. He looked at her, at the deep, old pain in her eyes. "Some stories are harder to tell than others." "But they must be told," she replied, "or they become ghosts that haunt you." In that moment, under the vast starry sky, he knew he wasn't just fighting for his land or for their safety. He was fighting for her. For the chance to see the ghosts in her eyes finally find peace. He was fighting for a future where they could both tell new stories. The night before the attack, Anna came to him with one of the carved stones from the pouch. It was warm from her hand. "This symbol means home," she said, pressing it into his palm. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you have given us this. You have given us a home." He closed his hand around the stone, its edges digging into his skin. He had started with a simple transaction, a bargain for labor. Now he was all in. His life, his home, his future, all wagered in a war that had found him in his quiet corner of the world. The dawn was coming, and with it, Marshall Thompson and his own brand of redemption. They came at sunrise, just as Anna said they would. Not just the marshal and a few ranchers. It was a posse. At least 15 men, armed to the teeth, their faces grim and determined. They thought they were coming to clear out a nest of savages. They had no idea they were walking into a perfectly laid trap. Caleb and the women were hidden, spread out across the rocky ridge that overlooked the ranch house. They were outnumbered, but they had the high ground, and they had surprise on their side. The posse rode in slow, confident. Thompson yelled out, "Caleb, we know you're in there. Send out the women, and we'll let you live." Silence was his only answer. The first shot didn't come from Caleb's rifle. It came from the eldest woman, hidden 50 yards away. One of the riders clutched his shoulder and fell from his horse. Chaos erupted. The posse scattered, looking for cover, firing wildly at the house. But their targets weren't in the house. Caleb and the others opened fire from the ridge. It wasn't a battle. It was a turkey shoot. The posse was pinned down, caught in a crossfire. The men's confidence evaporated, replaced by panic. This wasn't what they signed up for. They were ranchers, not soldiers. They started to fall back, dragging their wounded. But Thompson wasn't running. He was furious. He took cover behind a water trough and scanned the ridge, his eyes searching. He saw a flicker of movement. Anna, reloading. He raised his rifle, a cruel smile on his face. This was it. The moment he could finally erase the last witness to his crimes. He never saw Caleb. Caleb had moved down the ridge, circling around. He came up behind the trough, his pistol drawn. "Drop it, Marshal." he said, his voice cold as a grave. Thompson froze. He slowly turned, his face a mask of shock and hatred. You, he snarled. You threw your life away for them. They gave me my life back, Caleb said simply. From the corner of his eye, Caleb saw two of the ranchers regrouping, getting ready to charge him. He was out of time. He didn't hesitate. He fired. The marshal went down. The other men saw their leader fall, and the last of their fight broke. They fled, a disorganized mob, leaving their dead and wounded behind. Silence fell over the ranch, broken only by the smell of gunpowder and the soft morning breeze. It was over. They buried the dead, their own and the posse's. The earth makes no distinction. In the days that followed, a new kind of peace settled over the ranch. A peace that had been earned, fought for. Word of the fight spread. The official story was that Marshal Thompson and a posse had been ambushed by a band of renegade Apache. But the people in Redemption knew Caleb. They knew he wasn't a man to start a fight. And they knew the marshal was a man who enjoyed his authority a little too much. They left Caleb and his new family alone. One afternoon, Anna led Caleb up into the hills behind the house. She brought him to the hidden spring. It was a small, beautiful pool of crystal-clear water, surrounded by ancient stones. Using the carved stones from the pouch as a guide, they found the spot. They dug. They didn't find gold or silver. They found something far more valuable. Leather-wrapped parcels containing intricately woven blankets, ceremonial pipes carved from sacred wood, and bundles of Kreuter that held the history and the spirit of a people. Anna unwrapped a blanket, her fingers tracing the patterns. It was a story blanket, telling the tale of her ancestors. She looked up at Caleb, her eyes shining with tears. You did not just save us, she said. You saved our memory. The seasons turned. The ranch flourished. It was no longer a place of silence and grief. It was a place of life, of laughter, of two different families becoming one. Lily grew up with two languages, two cultures, two histories. She was a bridge between two worlds. One evening, Caleb and Anna stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky. It was the same porch where he had once sat alone, a prisoner of his past. She leaned her head on his shoulder. It felt natural. Right. Does your heart still hurt, Caleb? She asked softly. He thought for a moment. The locked room inside him was still there. The memories of Mary would always be a part of him. But the room wasn't locked anymore. The door was open, and light was pouring in. No, he said, and it was the truest thing he had ever said. It's full. He had started with nothing but a broken heart and an empty house. He made a simple bargain and ended up with everything. He had traded his solitude for a family. He had traded his silence for a future. And it all started with 5 strangers who appeared in a storm. If you enjoyed this story and believe that a home is something you build, not just something you find, do us a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. We've got more stories coming your way.